On January 23, 2026, in the Lyman sectors of eastern Ukraine, the battlefield was unusually quiet, lacking the thunderous artillery barrages and large-scale armored offensives that had so frequently marked prior clashes in this fiercely contested zone. Instead, the area was under constant, relentless surveillance by countless drones of various sizes and capabilities, creating a sustained and pervasive psychological strain on soldiers at every level, from infantrymen on the front lines to high-ranking commanders coordinating operations from command posts. Movements slowed to cautious, deliberate steps. Soldiers hesitated even in once considered safe areas, painfully aware that any sudden motion could instantly reveal their position and invite lethal retaliation. Forests, once alive with the natural sounds of wildlife and rustling leaves, stood eerily silent and motionless, while ruined shelters and makeshift bunkers, which had traditionally offered some measure of protection, now only increased vulnerability against the ever-watchful electronic eye scanning from above. This day marked a profound and defining shift in the nature of warfare, dominated no longer by the brute force of guns or tanks, but by swarms of inexpensive, technologically advanced drones equipped with infrared, thermal, and ultra-high-resolution sensors that penetrated natural camouflage. These drones saturated the airspace above the battlefield, systematically unraveling long-held beliefs about cover and concealment that had guided military tactics for centuries. Ukrainian UAV and FPV units maintained a near-continuous aerial presence through meticulously coordinated handoffs between drone operators, enabling commanders to make critical real-time decisions based on the most up-to-date and comprehensive intelligence available. Danger became omnipresent and effectively invisible, fostering an almost nerve-wracking tension, where any noise or movement risked immediate detection and subsequent attack. Traditional terrain features lost their protective effectiveness. Forests no longer concealed troops as drones adjusted altitude and camera angles to peer through thick canopies. Thermal imaging penetrated dense foliage and adverse weather conditions alike, and silent hovering drones waited patiently for any revealing movement. Survival shifted from relying on ground-level cover to mastering the art of avoiding detection from above, fundamentally changing combat tactics and forcing soldiers to adapt rapidly or face annihilation. Persistent surveillance also altered the battlefield's concept of time. The brief moments of safety that soldiers once relied upon vanished, replaced by an unending, oppressive awareness that every motion could be observed, recorded, and analyzed, eroding morale and heightening stress to unprecedented levels. The absence of immediate attacks bred uncertainty and paranoia among Russian units, who were left guessing whether they were currently being targeted for strikes, artillery barrages, or intelligence gathering, making every decision a high-stakes gamble. This uncertainty slowed decision-making processes and made even routine actions fraught with the fear of exposure, significantly undermining operational effectiveness. Over time, the psychological pressure grew, not from the direct violence of combat, but from relentless surveillance and the constant possibility of exposure, signaling a fundamental and irreversible change in warfare where gaining and maintaining air dominance became as crucial to success as ground forces themselves, reshaping strategic priorities and the widespread use of low-cost drones, skilled operators, and real-time video feeds has fundamentally transformed the nature of battlefield surveillance, effectively eliminating many of the blind spots that older, more traditional surveillance systems relied upon. This technological evolution has made observation not only inexpensive, but also highly adaptable and nearly continuous, allowing for an unprecedented level of situational awareness. The shift profoundly altered the dynamic between observers and the observed, moving away from a reliance on overwhelming firepower to achieve dominance. Ukrainian drone units, for instance, did not need to attack every enemy position to maintain control over contested areas. Instead, their dominance stemmed from a persistent and unyielding aerial presence that constantly reminded enemy soldiers that concealment was no longer a reliable form of protection. Safety on the battlefield thus depended less on where soldiers moved and more on precisely when they moved. Yet even timing offered no absolute guarantees, as the threat of detection and attack was relentless and omnipresent. In the devastated sectors of Lyman, Russian soldiers traveling alone or in small groups were detected early by Ukrainian UAV operators. But rather than launching immediate attacks, the operators often allowed these soldiers to continue moving for extended periods. From the perspective of those on the ground, it might have seemed as though nothing was happening. Yet above them, every single step was meticulously recorded, analyzed, and integrated into complex behavioral patterns. This created a dangerous illusion of unnoticed movement, a tactical deception that was carefully orchestrated. The restraint shown by Ukrainian operators was not due to technical limitations, but was an intentional tactical choice. Prolonged surveillance allowed operators to study soldiers' behavior during moments when they believed they were unobserved, enabling the identification of habitual routes, likely destinations, and perceived safe zones. Rather than launching impulsive or reactive attacks, the drones gathered intelligence that turned the battlefield landscape into a detailed map of enemy habits and routines. This intelligence made subsequent strikes far more effective, as attacks were timed to occur when targets were most vulnerable, thereby reducing the likelihood of missed opportunities and minimizing wasted ammunition or exposure of friendly forces. When these attacks were finally launched, they were decisive and had a near certainty of success, demonstrating the power of patience and precision over brute force. Psychologically, this approach had a profound impact on enemy soldiers, as the delayed strike sowed seeds of doubt regarding their own situational awareness, transforming movement itself into a mental burden fraught with fear, hesitation, and uncertainty. This persistent pressure slowed down enemy movement, eroded their confidence, and made even the simplest tasks perilous and fraught with anxiety. The strategy of delayed engagement effectively shifted control of the battlefield, allowing Ukrainian operators to dictate not only when contact occurred, but also how it unfolded, stripping enemy soldiers of any semblance of initiative and imposing continuous, debilitating stress without providing clear feedback on when it was safe to move. This method closely resembles the sensor-to-shooter concepts found in American military doctrine, but condenses the entire process of detection, tracking, and engagement into a swift, highly efficient cycle that redefines modern battlefield control and highlights the transformative impact of drone warfare on contemporary combat operations. In the drone environment surrounding Deadkin Lyman, the entire operational sequence, from detection to engagement, occurs within a single operator's line of sight, with the camera serving as the sensor. Decisions are made within seconds, and the shooter is the same platform that identified the target, collapsing what once required coordination among multiple units into the actions of one person and one machine. This compression transforms observation into direct control. Detection doesn't necessitate immediate action because the option to strike remains available as long as the target is in motion. Consequently, survival on the battlefield hinges less on speed or brute force and more on avoiding recognizable patterns. For ground soldiers, this demand is almost impossible to meet. Movement itself becomes a vulnerability, and even structures originally designed for protection lose their effectiveness. Historically, in modern warfare, abandoned houses, collapsed walls, and ruined buildings were among the safest spots, as thick masonry could stop shrapnel, block small arms fire, and obstruct enemy sightlines. Around towns like Donetsk and Lyman, such structures offered soldiers a semblance of stability a place to pause, rest, or wait out artillery barrages. From the ground, solid walls still seemed reassuring, and the instinct to seek hard cover remained strong, even though the nature of the threat had evolved. That instinct, however, has become increasingly perilous. FPV drones don't approach like traditional attackers who move at ground level or fire from a distance. They operate in three-dimensional space. Operators pilot them through doors flung open by blast waves, windows shattered by prior fighting, and breaches ripped into walls by shelling. Critically, drones exploit vertical angles that infantry rarely consider in the heat of the moment. A building that feels secure on three sides offers no defense from above, where roofs may be thin, damaged, or entirely missing. What once slowed an attack now traps it in place. Aerial access fundamentally redefines the value of hard cover. Walls are built to stop horizontally traveling bullets and fragments, not threats that can descend, hover, and reposition midair. Even thick concrete becomes meaningless when a drone can approach from the rooftop, pause, and select the optimal entry point. Recorded strikes reveal that drones do not rush inside but wait to confirm movement and positioning before committing. The protection once afforded by mass and material vanishes once the attacker controls angle and timing. This shift profoundly alters soldiers' experience of urban space. Rooms that once felt sealed now feel exposed. Corners that once offered safety become traps. Every opening becomes a potential entry point, not just for observation but for attack. Thus, structures that previously reduced risk now serve to concentrate it. When an FPV drone strikes inside confined spaces, the resulting blast is amplified, turning the shelter itself into part of the weapon. The building does not fail. It assists the strike. These dynamics carry significant implications for future urban warfare. Traditional urban defense depends on controlling streets, intersections, and approach routes at ground level. FPV drones negate this logic by bypassing these paths altogether. They traverse the air, selecting entry points defenders cannot easily block without sealing themselves in completely. Vertical dominance supersedes horizontal control, shifting the concept of a defensible position from a fixed location to continuous movement. This transition challenges long-established training paradigms, where infantry are taught to seek hard cover, move into structures, and use walls to shape engagements. In drone-saturated environments, traditional soldier tactics quickly become liabilities, fundamentally altering the nature of ground combat and demanding a complete reevaluation of battlefield strategies. Protection in these scenarios depends far less on physical cover, such as walls or trenches, and increasingly on how rapidly a position can be abandoned once detected by enemy drones hovering silently from above. Urban terrain, which once presented a maze of complex pathways and visual obstructions for ground troops, now appears significantly simplified and more transparent when viewed from the aerial perspective of real-time drone surveillance, revealing building outlines, entry points, window openings, and even the faintest signs of movement below. As armed conflicts continue to shift toward densely populated urban centers, the advantages provided by aerial reconnaissance and surveillance remain dominant despite the rapid evolution of countermeasures and electronic warfare tools. Buildings still offer some degree of protection and concealment from direct ground fire, but they simultaneously expose occupants to a new class of threats from above, where drone operators maintain near constant visual contact. Without effective and integrated countermeasures, the protective value of urban shelter steadily erodes, forcing soldiers into a defensive posture that is both reactive and precarious. Consequently, troops often resort to improvised and generally ineffective tactics born out of desperation rather than design. For instance, during first-person view, FPV drone attacks near the contested regions of Donetsk and Lyman, Russian troops instinctively responded by firing rifles at the buzzing drones or by freezing motionless beneath foliage. Actions shaped primarily by training protocols designed to counter visible, terrestrial enemies rather than agile, fast-moving aerial threats. These shots frequently came too late, as drones approach with unpredictable trajectories and at high speeds, making timely, accurate firing extraordinarily difficult. Small arms fire rarely neutralizes drones, as the inherent recoil of the weapons, the limited upward angle of aiming, and the heightened stress levels experienced by soldiers severely degrade accuracy. Meanwhile, motionless concealment under trees or behind debris also proves ineffective, since drones can hover silently, continuously observing and detecting even the slightest involuntary movements or shifts in the environment that betray a hidden presence. Unlike manned aircraft, FPV drones are not restricted by fuel limitations or pilot fatigue, enabling them to maintain position indefinitely and patiently wait for the ideal moment to strike, thereby negating the traditional advantage ground troops might have had in reacting quickly to aerial threats. Soldiers thus face relentless psychological and tactical pressure, forced into a constant dilemma between staying perfectly still to avoid detection or moving to safer ground. Neither choice guaranteeing their safety. Fundamentally, Russian frontline units lack effective, low-level counter-drone systems that are seamlessly integrated with infantry operations. Electronic jamming devices, short-range air defense units, and specialized drone detection tools are scarce or entirely absent at the squad level, leaving troops heavily reliant on personal weapons and improvisational tactics that are ill-suited for combating sophisticated aerial threats. This critical capability gap stems from outdated military doctrines and training programs, focused predominantly on conventional warfare models, resulting in frontline forces being chronically underprepared for the widespread and evolving challenges posed by FPV drones and similar unmanned aerial systems. The absence of a coordinated, layered defense against these drones significantly compromises operational security, troop morale, and the overall effectiveness of infantry units engaged in modern drone-dominated battlefields. Training failed to keep pace with the rapidly evolving demands of the battlefield, while equipment distribution remained inconsistent, forcing frontline units to rely heavily on experience rather than formal preparation. This situation did not arise from a lack of courage or effort, but from a fundamental disconnect between the training provided and the realities faced in combat. Blaming individuals for these shortcomings overlooks the broader systemic issues at play. Soldiers acted according to the tools and habits embedded in them, not the modern systems they urgently needed. When multiple units persistently repeat ineffective tactics, it points to structural problems rather than poor decision-making. Modern combat zones severely penalize any delays in adapting to new threats. And in the areas of Donetsk and Lyman, this penalty manifested through relentless aerial assaults, one engagement after another. These vulnerabilities become increasingly perilous when troops and equipment are constrained to predictable routes. Russian forces around Donetsk and Lyman continued to depend on well-known logistical pathways, not out of safety but familiarity, and under intense pressure, habit often supplants strategic adaptation. These supply roads, approach routes, and staging zones have developed over months, shaped more by terrain and distance than by the new reality of constant surveillance from the sky. Altering these routes demands time, coordination, and protective measures, all of which are challenging when drones monitor every movement. Consequently, units revert to the same exposed corridors, hoping that speed or timing might offset their visibility. Such predictability proves deadly when airspace remains under constant observation. Ukrainian drones do not need to conduct broad searches. Predictable movement patterns allow operators to learn schedules, identify choke points, and patiently await convoys. Continuous surveillance ensures that even brief delays or minor traffic congestions significantly elevate risk. Vehicles traveling sequentially create unmistakable visual signatures from above, transforming logistics from a concealed flow into a conspicuous chain. Ukrainian drone units capitalize on this by maintaining relentless pressure rather than sporadic attacks. Units like the Signum Battalion sustain persistent FPV drone activity over crucial routes and positions, forcing Russian forces to choose between exposure or retreat. Rather than striking every convoy immediately, drones cultivate an environment of uncertainty around resupply, making it increasingly costly to hold positions. Over time, this leads to gradual withdrawals instead of sudden collapses. In response, Russian troops have experimented with motorcycles and other lightweight vehicles to increase speed and reduce detectability. However, these platforms introduce new vulnerabilities. Lacking armor, riders are fully exposed and easy to track once spotted. FPV drones can match their velocity, follow their routes, and strike with precision. What was intended as a tactic to evade detection instead invites relentless pursuit. This shift from heavy convoys to agile mobility underscores the modern logistical dilemma under drone surveillance. Minimizing visibility often heightens vulnerability, while adding protection slows movement and concentrates targets. In this dynamic, drones inherently favor the observer rather than the mover, as every new tactic creates recognizable patterns, and every pattern can be exploited. Even natural elements once relied upon for concealment now work against ground forces. In the winter conditions of the Donetsk and Lyman sectors, snow does not mask movement. It reveals it. Snow-covered terrain turns the battlefield into a stark record of every action, as white surfaces enhance contrast and eliminate the visual noise that soldiers previously depended on to stay hidden. What once seemed like nature's camouflage now operates in the opposite way, exposing every movement with unyielding clarity. From above, the landscape transforms into a simpler, cleaner, and more readable scene, offering clarity that benefits the observer rather than the observed. Footprints become the first giveaway. In fresh snow, a single trail can reveal not just a soldier's current location, but also their past movements and likely future direction. These tracks endure for some time, especially in cold weather, allowing UAV operators to trace them backward to previous positions or forward to a potential shelter. Tire tracks provide even more detailed information, disclosing the size of vehicles, their direction, speed, and stopping points. What seems temporary on the ground thus becomes a lasting signature from the air, enabling detailed study without urgency. Heat signatures also undermine concealment efforts. Engines, exhausts, and recently occupied spots emit warmth that starkly contrasts with the cold environment. Snow around vehicles melts unevenly, outlining roads and stopping areas in visible patterns, while disturbed ground reveals darker soil beneath the white surface, forming shapes that are clearly distinguishable from above. Even without sophisticated sensors, standard drone cameras can detect these changes, especially when operators compare real-time images with previous flights. Bare trees further reduce cover, while foliage during warmer months breaks up outlines and hides movement. Winter strips branches bare, opening sight lines that previously did not exist. Forests lose their depth and become thin barriers rather than solid cover, allowing individual figures in small groups to stand out against uniform backgrounds. Any movement draws immediate attention. Soldiers who once relied on tree lines as safe routes now find themselves exposed along corridors, visible from multiple angles. This environment also diminishes camouflage effectiveness. Although white coverings may initially blend with snow, movement quickly reveals their presence. Adjusting equipment, shifting positions, or even turning in place creates contrast that trained observers notice immediately. Camouflage works best when observation is brief and distant, but winter drones monitor closely and repeatedly, gradually turning even well-hidden positions into familiar shapes within known patterns. Rather than slowing aerial warfare, winter accelerates it. Cold air can improve battery performance, and stable weather extends flight windows. Snow reflects light, enhancing camera visibility during the day, while long nights provide opportunities for thermal imaging. Drone activity does not pause in winter. It extends across hours once considered marginal. The psychological impact mirrors the physical. Soldiers who once saw winter as protection must rethink every movement. Tracks cannot be quickly erased, heat cannot easily be concealed, and trees no longer guarantee safety. This constant exposure breeds hesitation and fatigue, as every step leaves evidence that may persist long after the moment passes. Winter becomes not a shield but a record of movement inscribed into the terrain. For UAV operators, snow simplifies the battlefield. Patterns emerge more quickly, mistakes are easier to detect, and the margin for error narrows, not because weapons are stronger, but because information is clearer. In this setting, patience becomes a powerful tool as drones wait for targets to commit to visible paths that cannot later be concealed. Collectively, these factors reveal a battlefield where safety is no longer tied to terrain, season, or structure. By early 2026, Russian forces in Donetsk and Lyman faced relentless drone surveillance that tracked every move. FPV drone strikes crippled personnel and equipment, supply lines were targeted, and shelter strategies failed under constant aerial observation. Soldiers were detected before moving, tracked during advances, and targeted when escape routes vanished, while logistics units faced similar fates on roads monitored by advanced drones. Snow-covered terrain, damaged buildings, and dense forests provided no cover, exposing tactical errors. This failure shows traditional cover and concealment are obsolete once an adversary gains air superiority. For American viewers, it raises a troubling question. How prepared are our militaries for constant surveillance and precision strikes? For more analysis and updates, subscribe to Military Force.